Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about the INFP personality type. If we're going to describe them in a few keywords, they're creative, they are strong-willed, idealistic, empathic, they are authentic, and also passionate. So these people are people who often are very loving people. They really care about the people close to them. But to strangers, they might act a bit cold sometimes. So from the outside, they don't always seem that way. They are very emotional people. They are very in touch with their emotions, but they don't always show it on the outside. I do want to say that I think they are very often described as seemingly pretty cold on the outside, not showing emotion, almost as if they never share their emotions. But I want to say, first of all, they will share their emotions with the people close to them. And also, some of them, I think it depends on the person. Some of them can have these moments when they show a lot of emotion. All of a sudden, it just kind of comes out because it's still their dominant function, right? As in INFPs, their dominant function is feeling, it's introverted feeling. That's how they operate, which means that even when it's an internal process, it can still show sometimes in random moments when they can seem like they get really emotional out of nowhere, basically. So, what they do is they really want to explore who they are, and they base their sense of identity on their emotions a lot. Like, for example, the things they really care about are things that they will attach to their own identity. And their identity and their sense of self is very important to them. The INFPs and the ISFPs, you can see that they are different from other people, as in they're the only people who their self and their soul is the thing that's at the forefront, is the thing that's always, it's always there. Like, everyone is in touch with themselves, like who they are sometimes, right? But they are like most of the time. And that's also why they can seem sometimes kind of intimidating, because it's like they are present and they're not going to take other people's opinions as their own. They are very individualistic. They're in touch with their own opinion on things, their own feelings about things. And because of this, they are, like I said, authentic. They live their life how they want and are not easily influenced by other people, except, of course, when they really care about those people, because they are a contradiction. There's a contradiction in the sense that, on the one hand, they are very individualistic. On the other hand, they are very interested in people and sometimes in animals as well. They're interested in people and relationships, but they're not gonna be interested in everyone. It's just that they want connections in their life. That doesn't mean they always have them. They might actually be lonely because maybe they haven't found the right people, right? Maybe people don't accept them for who they are, for being themselves, or for being sensitive, which are two things that people might have an issue with, right? They might think that they're too emotional or they shouldn't be allowed to be themselves. They should kind of conform and act like everyone else. But they definitely want relationships. They crave like human connection and they understand people. Like I said, they're very empathic. I also want to say that even though I'm gonna be talking a lot about introvert feeling, not all of the things I'm saying here are necessarily introverted feeling. Because when I'm talking about empathic, the fact that the INFP is an intuitive is the reason why I'm using that word as well. And I didn't use it for the ISFP because I think I'm gonna have to go into the cognitive functions for a bit, but think the combination of introverted feeling and extroverted intuition makes them have the capacity to be very empathic people. And I want to say capacity because the thing with introvert feeling is that introvert feeling is naturally a self-focused function that's focused on yourself and not focused on other people, which means that some INFPs, especially more unhealthy INFPs, they may not show a lot of empathy. They may actually seem very self-centered, but even though some of them might appear that way, they have the capacity to be very empathic people if they want to be, because they are naturally focused on themselves and their own feelings. But if they want to, they can easily also put themselves in other people's shoes because their feeling function is very strong and they have a very deep understanding of their own feelings, which means they can easily imagine what someone else feels like because they just think about how did I feel before, and that's how they must be feeling. Because they have such a deep understanding of themselves, they can use it to understand other people as well. They have a high control of their emotions in a way. It's just this function that they can do a lot with, because you can be very creative with your dominant function because it's your strongest function, right? So even though maybe someone who has introverted feeling as their inferior function may not be able to do that very easily, someone with introvert feeling as their dominant function, and also being an intuitive with great like imagination and seeing connections very easily, they can use that to try to imagine someone else's perspective relatively easily. And therefore they kind of are mimicking extroverted feeling, using introverted feeling, right? They also want to express themselves usually, which means they can often be like want to be artists or at least do something creative as like a hobby to express their emotions, to express who they are, or to express their like intuition because they had an idea or they had a vision for something they could do and they wanna try it. I said passionate. They will protect what they care about at all costs because they have the emotional drive to do it. Also, if we're gonna compare them to ISFPs, for example, a type that can be seen as pretty similar in a lot of ways, they can seem more unconventional than ISFPs, even more authentic because they are intuitives, which means that they can kind of really like to have their own views on things. Like they have the will to explore alternative ways of thinking than maybe what they heard people say around them or what they grew up with. Like they prefer to use their own imagination and their own insights, seeing connections that maybe other people don't see. They also want to explore possibilities that haven't necessarily been tried before, as long as they can see it with their intuition, which can make them they might stand out more than ISFP. They might also seem a bit more quiet and reserved, mostly because they might be more often a bit more like lost in thought because they really like to, like I said, use their imagination. They might maybe also feel like they are more different than other people compared to an ISFP who might find it easier to fit in with other people. So I was reading Gifts Differing, which is the book from Myers-Briggs, or at least from Isabel Myers, who said about INFPs that they could be good at science, like they could be scientists. And I kind of want to talk about that, which is also something that might be associated with them, but for example not with an ISFP because they're intuitives. I wanted to read something from the book that I thought was interesting. So she says, perhaps the enthusiasm generated by the feeling of an INF basically an INF type. She was talking about both INFPs and INFJs here. Spurs intuition to reach a truth that analysis by thinking will confirm in due course. So she was talking about why INFJs and INFPs seem to do well in science, even though they are feelers, and people might expect the INT types to do better. And for this, I just want to say that intuition and thinking are functions that I believe are very similar, actually. Intuition is an information function, which means that intuition basically is data, whereas thinking is a function that looks at how exactly things within a system are connected to each other, which means that, for example, an ST type will use their thinking function to analyze sensing systems, basically. So say they want to explore how a car works because that's a sensing thing, right? Which means that an NT type can explore more theoretical data with their thinking function. Intuition will give people random insights, and thinking could reveal the reasoning behind that insight, because it will be able to understand exactly how everything connects, like cause and effect, how something leads to a certain conclusion. And therefore it could possibly validate such an insight that came from like intuition. I think that's what she means here. What I'm trying to say is intuition and thinking can kind of do the same thing, but they both like work the other way around. You ask yourself a question. A thinker is just gonna think, okay, I know that this is connected to this and this is connected to that, and this is the answer to the question. And for an intuitive, they have no idea what exactly their brain is doing. And because they don't, because it's subconscious, that's the reason why an intuition function can still be paired with a feeling function, right? The intuitive will ask themselves a question and they will get the answer, but they won't get the reasoning. And that's why INFPs are not dumb. I also don't want to say that, ISFPs are dumb. People really underestimate, I think, the power of the functions that are not thinking functions, right? So when we're talking about the enthusiasm generated by the feeling of an INF type Spurs intuition to reach a truth, I kind of want to highlight that I don't fully agree with this. I'm also not fully sure what she means by this, but if she's trying to say that enthusiasm can maybe make intuition work better, I personally think that doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you're gonna say that like you would basically say that the NF types have stronger intuition than the NT types, which I think doesn't make any sense. But what I think is true is that an INF type can become very passionate about something because they're feelers, and that can drive them to want to succeed in a certain field, right? For example, an INFP in science who absolutely loves science, totally passionate about science, is going to do well because they're obsessed with it, right? They become obsessed with it. They are so passionate that they are gonna do anything to succeed, right? And I think that's what feeling could do, but I don't think that feeling can influence intuition in any way. This is a sentence that can be interpreted in different ways, so I'm just not gonna make assumptions about what exactly she meant. I just wanted to make that clear in case anyone thinks that I think that, because I don't. But yeah, I don't even know if she thinks that. I'm just kind of confused. Isabel Myers was an INFP, and that's a good way to get to my next point. They can be great psychologists, potentially. So they can do great in the field of psychology. Then when we are talking about potential jobs that they could want to do, like I said, could be good psychologists. They might want to work with people, like helping people. They might want to do anything creative. They might want to be an artist, or they might just want to follow any of their passions because they are often passionate about something, which can be anything, right? They might want to just do something that they have some kind of personal connection with for whatever reason. And like I said, they don't change for anyone, or at least they won't change for any strangers, which can make them seem quite independent. They like to explore who they are, their inner emotions and value judgments, so they will basically judge everything. How do they feel about it? Based on their own emotional life, based on what's important to them, what's not important to them, and they always follow their hearts. They might love philosophy and just theorizing about things. They are more future oriented than, for example, an ISFP would be, constantly having creative plans. And they also forgot to mention this as the jobs, but they might be good writers. Again, if we want to compare INFPs and ISFPs, right? Imagine the INFP could be a writer writing a song or writing a play or something, and then the ISFP would be more likely to be the one who's, like, for example, performing it on stage, right? Like singing the song or being an actor or dancing or something, right? So when we're talking about their weaknesses, they might struggle with applying structure in their lives, like keeping things organized, planning things. So the IP types, they don't really have a desire to control things very much. They prefer to kind of just go with the flow, which means they are really adaptable people, and they're good at just taking opportunities as they come. But the problem is they might, because they can seem kind of passive in a way where they don't feel a need to control things very much, to make a plan, to try to create a certain outcome. Whereas the EJs can seem like they're almost too controlling, right? Like the IPs might seem like they could sometimes want to be a bit less passive and try to control things a bit, to shape things to how they want it to be. Because if they never do that, they are going to become dependent on those random opportunities that come their way, right? They're going to be dependent on them. It's going to be harder for them to actually reach their goals because they don't make a plan to at least direct things a bit more, right? So their reasoning about things, their thinking reasoning may be off sometimes because they're very focused on their feelings, which means that it's hard for them to be fully objective about things. Luckily, they also have extroverted intuition and introverted sensing. So they can still use those functions to kind of look at some data that's not feelings, right? But they are not going to understand very well the reasoning behind the data. And yeah, it can mean that they really need to develop their extrovert thinking more so that they can use this function more often, and they can actually analyze problems a lot better and maybe find solutions. And also just being objective about things and not being biased towards their own feelings, which can be really hard for people who have dominant feeling, right? So they might have a natural tendency of trusting feelings over data, which means that instead of looking at the data and thinking, okay, the truth about a situation is what the data tells us, they might actually do the opposite thing, where they have a certain emotional investment and it's so strong for them that instead of trusting the data, they are going to try to find data to support their feeling, right? Without actually understanding the data, because they are not using their thinking function instead of actually analyzing it themselves, because they don't want to do that, because they don't want to lose touch with their feelings, which can be kind of dangerous for them to maybe trust information that's not reliable and all that, or trying to convince people that they are right with arguments that don't make any sense. Anyhow, that can be a weakness. Then, of course, if they want to solve this problem, the only thing they need to do is try to develop their extroverted thinking more and use it more, and not be afraid of ignoring their feelings for a moment. So, let's talk about the cognitive functions, even though I mentioned them like 100 times already. Their dominant function, like I said, is introverted feeling, which is the reason why they are focused on their own emotions, their values, their identity, why they're interested in people, and part of the reason why they are creative. Their auxiliary function is extroverted intuition. This is the function that makes them want to explore future possibilities and ideas, makes them interested in theories. It makes them have a kind of a more spontaneous side to them, but they can also be pretty adaptable. This also makes them creative. Their tertiary function is introverted sensing. Whenever they are in an introverted feeling, introverted sensing loop, they might actually be very focused on, instead of exploring future possibilities, right? They might just want to kind of reflect on the past, on past experiences, and attach themselves to it a bit and think about how it relates to their identity. Basically analyzing the past, but analyzing it based on their emotions. And they might get attached to some specific things from their past, right? Or traditions. But in the end, they are still not afraid of trying new things or new ways to live, right? It's just that they might be attached to some specific things in their past, and sometimes they might think about it a lot, but their actions are gonna still be more adventurous. They'll still be thinking about the future a lot as well. Their inferior function is extroverted thinking, which is the reason why they might have difficulty with applying structure in their life. They might have difficulty with understanding the logical reasoning behind things, or finding solutions to problems, analyzing things. This is also the reason why they have difficulty considering other people's perspectives, and prefer to be focused on their own perspective on things and their own opinion, which could make them seem self-centered. They also may have difficulty with extroverted sensing because it is their blind spot. So the weakest functions are basically extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. So yeah, that was the INFP type summarized. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.